Well, the propeller is all boxed up, and I took it to the barge line to ship it out. It's on its way south to get overhauled. I got the bench cleaned back off again and set back up for fabric work, and I've got the elevators out now to do those. They're next on the list. They're going to be a little bit more difficult than horizontal stabilizers or any of the other things I've done because they have this balance here on them. So this makes it a little more difficult to cover. I've got to try to figure this out. I could use one wrap and come over this way, but then you have to kind of heat shrink it all the way around here to get it to come together. And I'm not sure whether that's the right way to do it or not. I can't use the trailing edge for my end for my seam, as if I come over this leading edge, this long spar here, then it has to be cut out around here, and then that would fold over and leave a seam right here. I think I have to do this in two pieces, put one piece on and then put the other piece on and glue them down. I have glued together. But the first thing to do is to wash these down with MEK and let them flash off. So that's what I'm going to do first while I figure this out. I've got that one elevator laying out there, and I've got it covered up with the fabric like the Shroud of Turin. And I was still debating on exactly how to do this. Now, I've got it covered the way I would do it if I was going to do it in one piece, but it just doesn't feel right. So I went down to the hangar and I dug out one of the original elevators, and we did those in two pieces. So after seeing that, it makes me feel better about doing them in two pieces. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and turn this back around and turn that fabric the other direction and cut it off one piece, and I'll cut off one piece for each one of these, and we'll glue those on, and then glue the second piece on. Now these elevators, of course, are just like the horizontal stabilizers. They're both exactly identical. Well, I'm going to cover them one way and one the other way so that it will have the seam up on the left side on one and the right side on the other. Although you can't, looking at those, you can't hardly see the seam on them. So we've got both elevators laid out there and marked where I'm going to cut the fabric. I didn't mark it with a pencil, I just ran down it with some thinned polytack, and I'll let that dry, set up, and then I'll cut those out. Cut out a little bit in here. This is going to just fold over here, so it doesn't need the full size of it, so it'd save a little bit. Probably could have squeezed a little bit more out of it, but I found it being too parsimonious is worse than being too generous on this stuff. Got the fabric glued on real nice on the front leading edge, the front spar of this elevator, and on this rib here that runs out on the balance. I've also got it tacked, glued down here around the rear section of this elevator, the trailing edge. I'm going to have to heat form it around these big curves here as it goes around here to get it to fit up. I'll still have to do a little bit of heat forming here. Now, because this trailing edge is so small, the diameter of the wire, the tubing that goes around here is so small, you've got to try to get as much glue on there as possible. I've got way more than I need here on this leading edge. I got it wrapped around 2/3 around that, so that's pretty good. I'll have to get as much of that around here on this trailing edge as I can. That's all heat formed around these curves now, and glued down around the edges, just on the one edge here. So I've got to turn it over here now and trim this, trim all this excess up, and go ahead and kind of glue that back in here. Well, the first side's all glued up. I just finished it, glued all the way around. I'm going to let this polytack set up real good before I shrink this fabric a little bit, and then put the other side on. Well, I've got this elevator cleaned up around here, the fabric where I glued it on. I took the iron and smoothed it all out and took some MEK and wiped down the excess. So I'm going to shrink this now, just to tighten this side up. as suggested for making it easier to put the other one on. I'm just going to shrink it down to 250 degrees for the first shrink. And as they say, do one side, and come over and do the other side. Over here, just going over these edges here now where the glue might stick up through them a little bit, and flatten that out just a little bit, make sure everything's down. I'd like to say that one's half done, but that skin is on. Now I can lay out the other side. I have to mark the perimeters here an inch in. That's where the other fabric's got to lay, so this will wind up being the bottom. There's that top fabric. I've got it cut out and glued it along this main spar and along this rib, and then I run some thinned polytack down here so I can cut this out where this glues onto this main spar and separate between the main rib here, or the main spar and the main rib. Also put a little bit around these hinge points so I can cut out around them, and I'm putting a little bit of glue on this trailing edge to glue it down. I'm being real careful just to get this glue on this top edge and this front edge here so that the fabric doesn't glue down on the inside there. When you first put the first one on, you can always go in there with your fingers and kind of push it out. But once this second piece goes on, it's kind of going to be where it's going to be. So I've got it glued along this trailing edge here up between these two ribs. I'll go ahead and glue on here a little bit as we go around, and I'm just gluing on the top surface here and the front face of it because I have to be able to shrink that around those corners and stuff. All I'll be able to do is stick it to the top here going around these corners, because there's just too much wrinkling going to go on there. But I'll go ahead and finish tacking that down to those corners. I need to have it tacked down so I can pull on it on the front edge and then shrink it, and then I can measure it and cut it to fit. Got the fabric all glued up to the front spar here. Got my line along here. That's 1 inch, so there's going to be more than 1 inch of glue on that because I did round that over on the top a little bit, so that's going to be a pretty good seam there. Let the glue set up on that, and then I'll take the iron and pull this fabric around and start heat forming it to this trailing edge. Let's see what I can do about getting this fabric formed around this trailing edge. I got my new iron, my new Costco iron. Problem with this iron is that it's just doesn't have a rheostat or anything to adjust temperature on. It's only got fixed settings on it, but like this one setting I measured at 230 degrees. Crazy. Now that I got my fancy dancy temperature thingy, let's see what happens there. Well, that says 290. That might be a little warmer than I first thought. 270, 290. That's a little warmer than I want. I'm going to turn it down to the synthetic setting and see what we get there. I was trying to calibrate that to figure out what the temperature settings was on it, but it's got a sensor in it that if it doesn't move every 15 seconds it shuts itself off, so I was having a heck of a time. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I got my second sheet, my second piece on there, all glued down. I need to shrink this, but I gotta wait, make sure the glue seams are all dried first. This front one is set up pretty good, and I went over it with the iron a little bit, straightened it out. It wasn't in too bad a shape. The back one here is, I just got finished with it. There was a few puckers in it here in a couple different spots, mostly down on that other end, and I took the heat gun and the iron and kind of took those out, and had to shrink the fabric a little bit in a couple of spots there, and got a couple little places where my line didn't stay straight because the fabric shrunk, but all in all it looks pretty darn good. So I'll let that set up, and then clean up the edge and stuff with the heat gun, and wash it down with MEK, and then we'll be ready to put the first coat of poly brush on there, and then do the rib stitching on this one. I went over all the seams on here that I heat shrunk or heat treated yesterday with the iron, and got all went over them with MEK on the seams here, and cleaned up all of the excess poly tack, and then I went ahead and set my iron up to 250 degrees, 260 is what it turned out to be, and stretched out and shrunk this side here. This was the new side, the top side. I just shrunk that, and then I went over this side here again one more time just to make sure I had it shrunk the original temperature. I guess that's set now, it's on wool. I'll go over this side, shrink it up again a little bit. Might as well just do it a little bit at a time and come up to it until I make sure I get this iron set. I'm going to run over this seam just a little bit. I don't want to shrink it, but I want to get it down. There's still some little lumps in it. Alright, pretty much done. That's ready for some poly brush now. And we'll get some rib stitching. Rib stitching good. Hey.